Good evening, everyone. My name is Maura Keefe. I'm one of the scholars in residence here, and I think he needs no introduction since he introduced himself, but Neil Remy. First off, Neil, I'm so glad you're back. Thank you for bringing Black Grace back to the Pillow. It's great to see it here. I want to start by talking about the last piece, back to the second, then to the first. And I really was struck by, in watching this piece tonight, how much you're not doing fusion. You're not trying to make something from different parts be a single thing, but you've just put some things on stage next to each other in a way that feels really intriguing to me. And I wonder if you could talk about the decision to bring in and leave alone some of the more traditional elements and then put them against the stuff that is more Western contemporary dance, and how you knew to put those things next to each other.
I guess, first of all, it's good to be back, and thank you for the introduction. Look, I didn't know how to put them back together, and how to put them next to each other, because I didn't think they were that different, to be honest with you. I think there's an interesting idea that when people talk about cultural dance, they tend to minimize it. And they look at it as being sort of folky and sort of cutesy, or whatever you want to call it. Certainly it's like that back home in Aotearoa. When people look at dance, they think there's this Western tradition of modern dance or contemporary dance or ballet, and then there's cultural dance. And cultural dance is somehow looked down upon. And I've never felt that way, because it's always been part of who I am. It's interesting that in the Samoan language, there's no word for arts as such. You know, they talk about drawing, and they can say there's a word for drawing and painting, but there's no word for that describes arts, because the arts practice, or the idea of practicing art separate to your daily life, doesn't really exist in our cultural context. And I think it's a very Western way of looking at things when people talk about contemporary dance or modern dance, and then they talk about cultural dance, or what they call sort of traditional dance.
I think I'm thinking specifically, and I'm sorry to not know how to pronounce it, the dance with the white ball. Is it poi?
Poi.
And that tradition is embedded in this world of Vivaldi. And that's what I think that's what I mean about that you're not trying to fuse the ideas, they happen at the same time. And could you talk a little bit about how you worked with the Vivaldi score there in particular? Let's start with the very striking rhythms and the visual pattern of that at the same time as we're hearing that music.
Sure. Before I talk about that, the woman performing that wonderful poi is Kura Te Ua, and she has her own company, Hawaiki too, who are a wonderful Maori dance company. And I spoke with her and her colleague Eds, who performs with the Taiaha, and we were doing what we've come to sort of call our wānanga one day during rehearsal, where we sit and we just talk about ideas. And I was explaining to them that when I was hearing this music, I was seeing this swinging object, like a poi, but it was in Māori they have this instrument that they spin, and it's called a pūrerehua, and it goes. And I saw that, and I heard that. And then I spoke with Kura and Eds about it, and they were wonderful in the process of contributing that section or their movement to that section.
Right. It's clear that expertise is just a different kind of training, and
oh, yes.
yeah. So the other thing that I find striking about this work, because everybody knows that Black Grace, once you start moving, you don't stop moving, right? Like that's like sort of the hallmark of critics and dance fans is we love to see the big ongoing action of these dances. And then you very deliberately thwart our expectations with the opening tableau, which is humorous, but then it also repeats through the piece. Could you talk a little bit about that and where you're building on the stillness from?
The tableau at the beginning is about my dad trying to put memories back together, and sort of, you know how you try and remember things and you can't quite remember them the same way, and it's sort of like it's harking back to a time when things in his life were probably a bit, you know, happier and a bit, you know, and so that whole concept of when you feel like you're moving but you're actually still, and vice versa. I wanted to try and capture that at the beginning. So it's like he's looking at old photographs and he's like putting them together and sort of moving people around to sort of make them happy, you know, as he dances. Because he's a wonderful dancer. He's a wonderful musician. And so that's that section. But yes, those previous works, Fastbach and Method, set to Bach, were, you know, were explorations in sort of that athleticism and things that I really appreciated about growing up as a young man in New Zealand and running around the field and, you know, playing rugby and whatever else you do. And so, but this was a bit different because the Gloria is very, Pacific Islanders are wonderful at subverting cultures. You know, we subvert language, like the name Black Grace. We took the word black that was traditionally used as a sort of a derogatory term, and we changed it to something that meant, you know, strong and daring. And so Pacific people take classical music and remake it almost and turn it into their hymns that they sing in church. And so the Gloria was really important, and the whole sort of idea of giving praise to God. You know, I don't go to church anymore, and I have my own personal beliefs around that. But my parents are very, very religious, and I respect that about them. And so, yeah.
So here's one of the things that I love about dance in particular. What you say is the memory of your father in the tableau is I also see as him building his family and building his community, so that it feels like kind of a reaffirmation of all that he has made as well. I want to go back to the second piece on the program because this is one that you, as you said to us in the beginning of the evening, you were inspired by a piece of visual art, and that was your original sort of entry into the art world as a younger person. And so I was thinking about you finding action in that. And if you could just say a little bit more about how whether you showed the painting to the dancers, are they getting the same information from it as you are?
Yes, I started my sort of very early exploration of the arts and visual art and painting in particular, and I stopped painting at high school because I asked my art teacher what the difference between this beautiful expressionist work and this kind of really sort of abstract pencil drawing of stick figures with guns and things. And I said, why are those two things hanging next to each other? And he couldn't explain it to me. He said, that's art. And so the next day when I went to art class, I did a similar thing. And he said, what's that? And I said, that's art. And I sort of gave up kind of after that. Because I needed to figure it out for myself. And so when Fatu sent me that painting, and he's known for his grid-like patterns with, you know, sort of repeating motifs of frigate birds and frangipani flowers. And it's very, very colourful and bright and beautiful. But this had some movement to it, and it was really kind of like energetic. And I had actually been, during the lockdown, going back to painting, and I started doing these kinetic paintings on old posters of Black Grace. So there were all these old posters that we have, and I would look at them, I'd close my eyes, and I'd get my brush or whatever it was, and I'd go, and then sort of look at the movement and think, what is it saying to me? And I'd just like go over it. And then I started doing a whole series of kinetic paintings with dancers where we would line a wall with canvas, and I would say, this is what I would like you to consider. And it was completely improvised. And then they would begin moving, and I would move behind them with a spray can or paint or whatever it was, and we'd just construct these paintings of movement in response to each other. And so that's how I sort of began the process of making Whatu.
The other thing that's striking about that is the real visual pleasure we get from the lighting design on the floor, and how it's very different from going back to the first piece. And so could you talk about how that collaboration?
Yeah, we've got a wonderful lighting designer, and his name's Jax, and he lives in New York, and he's been working with us for since 2017. And he's really, we kind of vibe, we understand each other, and he looked at it. I sent him all the references, we zoomed, we talked about it, and kept talking about it, and then he came back and he said, I'm thinking about this. And then he went away and he sort of came back with it all, and it was, that's him.
So, which then is a big contrast to Minoi Minoi, and you made a pretty perfect dance in 1999. So I'm glad you gave in to the pressure from Pam Tadji when she asked you to bring it back, because I feel like, especially seeing it in contrast to the closing work, we see a lot of ideas that have been important to you in a variety of ways. But I'm wondering what it was like to revisit it, and how long it had been on the shelf, and if the dancers were excited to do it.
The dance, I said to Pam, the other part of that discussion was, I can only bring it if I can find the guys to do it, because it requires a particular stance. The Pacific Island stance and the Māori stance has a lower centre of gravity, and the contemporary dance has a higher centre. It also has a more of an upright posture, whereas the Pacific dance has a slight contraction, almost like you're ready to fight. And so finding people that are able to do both of those things has proven really difficult over the years. And I've watched different versions of it over the years, and I guess I haven't been that happy with it. But with this group, I've really enjoyed it, and we've got a wonderful leader in Kalam, Sefo, who's at the front, who learned it many years ago and has come back just to help perform this work. So all the boys have done a really great job. There's obviously lots of things to do, but we'll get there.
So one of the things I was also thinking about, because when you first started gathering dancers, they were sort of your chums, and so that you were, at the same time as you were figuring out how to be an artist yourself, you're also figuring out, how am I training fellow artists? But now dancers come to your company because of a reputation, and so they have a different set of expectations. And I'm wondering, for example, in 2004, Neil told us that if dancers were late to the rehearsals, they had to do 200 press-ups, as he called them, push-ups, as we call them here. And I'm wondering if you still need that same sort of sense of discipline and whatever, or if that is much more.
I'm actually just looking at them over there. Look, it's 5 press-ups for every minute that you're late. So, if you're not there on the hour and it's 5 minutes, it's 25 press-ups. So it adds up pretty quick. This group's been all right. They've been pretty good. We had one of the young men turn up late to the airport. So he had to do his press-ups at the airport. It's one of those things. It's important to instill that sense of discipline, I think. And I think, going back to that idea, when I started Black Grace, yes, we were a bunch of friends, and over time, our ideas of where we wanted to go, obviously sort of went in different directions. And I've lost lots of friends in my pursuit of creating work. In fact, when we were here in 2005, that was probably the last tour that group of people ever did. We got to New York and I fired them all. And it was a tough time, but I was experiencing a lot of sort of burnout and things like that. They're not terrible people at all, and they didn't deserve that. It was just me being, we were on the road for 3 months, and I was sort of losing myself and all of that. But I'm still here, and dancers are harder to come by today. Really good, well-trained dancers in Aotearoa. They're really hard to come by.
So my last question may seem like a ridiculous one, as so many people whom you dance with regularly are regularly practiced singers as well, and that they're not necessarily separate things, wherein lots of dance companies in the United States that to ask dancers to sing, the physical challenge of it, forget anxiety about singing, but also the breath control and all of that. Could you just talk a little bit about how that threads through? It's such an important part of this, all the works tonight.
Again, for us Pacific people, we sing and dance. It's what we do, it's how we tell our stories. So we sit and we do action songs or sa, and while or maululu, and while we're doing that, we're describing things that we've experienced during the day, but we're singing and moving. And I guess it's just part of what we do. We grew up that way. We grew up singing, dancing. The wonderful gentleman Tuaine Ropati here with his Cook Island chant and his pe'e. He's dancing and he's chanting. It's all part of the culture. So it's not strange. But yes, I've certainly had companies where people can't sing, and I've encouraged them to pretend they're chewing gum on stage. And then you've got some wonderful singers. I mean, lots of these guys back here, they're not formally trained in contemporary dance. They are traditional dancers or actors and singers and performers. So they've done a wonderful job to be here and to perform this work.
Absolutely. We have time for a couple of your questions. This is a question about the difference in choreography of dances from Samoa and of Maori traditions, and if you could talk a little bit about that, and whether the word choreography is a useful one, I think, also in that question.
Yeah, there are with all of the Pacific Island or the Pacific Island nations, we're all very similar. There are little moments that separate what we do, much like our language, and so the Samoan. We have this we have a bit of a sway to us. Maori have this stomp, this takahi. It's very strong. Tongan have little what they call a teki, where they do their. I need the help. These little head movements. The Cook Island have their legs. And there are slight differences in all of the dance that we have, and I think that's about as far as I go with sort of speaking about it in too much depth. I'm certainly not an expert at it.
And so then maybe to build on that question is to ask how you as choreographer are choosing how to use those elements.
I had my parents in rehearsal. In the final week, I brought them up to our rehearsal studio, and they sat there. And there was a moment where I almost got a slap from my mother, and everyone, all the boys knew it, because they could see that look that they see when they're about to get it from their mother. Because I had. I bring them in to look at the work and to give me their feedback, and so that's I have those touchstones and working with these wonderful people. I mean, Tuaine Ropati, he's a master teacher, and Kura Te Ua and Ed Eremiha. They're steeped in these cultural traditions. So I feel very, very blessed and very safe to be working in the space, and ultimately it's my interpretation, and I've always been, there's a freedom, but there's a responsibility to do what you can to make sure and ensure that it's right and appropriate. And then after that, everyone's going to have their opinion, for sure. I know we'll go back home and, people will have their opinion of it. They always do. But, I've never let it bother me before, and I'm not about to start.
Another question or comment? This is a question about some of the performers that were, first, thank you for the enjoyment that he experienced watching all of these works. And if you could say something about the drummer. And I feel like we got a talking leader in what, I'm not sure that's the expression you used in the opening, but could you tell us a little bit about those two performers in particular?
Yeah, so the drummer, the musician is Isitolo. And he trained at under Tuaine Ropati, who's the silver fox up over here. They're both, Isitolo's been, he was a dancer and now plays music. And I've worked with him since 2019. Hello? 2018, and Tuaine, he's been in he's from Porirua as well, so where I grew up. Tuaine is from there, and he's famous in our part of the world,
and rightfully so.
Work. Yeah, and he's fantastic. I don't know what else to say, but they're both fantastic, and I'm really fortunate that both of them are here.
So this is a question about, again, your voice as choreographer, experts in the forms that you're bringing together and the dancers, and how much negotiating you're doing for whose voice is most present.
Thank you for the question, as we say in Samoan. It's my vision, and I don't make any sort of bones about that. I work with people in a particular way. I talk to people about what I would like. I ask people to try certain things, and if it's good, we'll work with it. If it's not, we won't. But I just want to say that. I don't want to try and be politically correct about this, but it's not a democracy at Black Grace. It's because at the end of the day, it's it's the vision. It takes years to think to make something. So we had 6 interrupted weeks of rehearsal to make these works and to remount Minoi, which is really tough going. So there had to be a whole lot of preparation leading into that. And I do find that whole discussion really interesting when it comes to, because I was a dancer too and I was asked to do things, so I'm really familiar with that. But I never once thought to myself that that's my piece of dance in there when I worked for someone. When I worked for Douglas and he asked me to make something or to do a whakaubaki, I never thought, oh, that's my whakaubaki up there. That's Douglas's vision. It's his vision. That's the way I've always seen it, and that's the way I work. And that's. I know that some people, want to be more egalitarian in their approach, but it's. I'm a very generous person, but when it comes to making art, I want the art to be a particular way, and we share it, we collaborate, and I'm so glad to be able to collaborate with these people. But at the end of the day, the vision is mine.
We welcome it anytime here, and I thank you so much for bringing these dancers together and bringing them here for us here at Jacob's Pillow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.